viewers, in today's video we're going to be making a fancy gatefold card. And for those of you who have read any of my blog posts or watched my videos, you know that I really don't like the A2 sized cards, which are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. To me, they're just kind of small. So I took a lead from some of the videos that I've watched here on YouTube and decided to upscale the videos that I saw to fit a 5x7 card. So today's project uses some digital papers that I got from Nitwit Collections, and before I got started I actually prototyped out how I wanted the layout to look and what papers I wanted for each section of the card. The nice thing about a 5x7 card is when you have paper kits and they have the little 2.5 inch by 3 inch cards that you always wonder what to do with. You know, if they're little journaling cards, but if you're not journaling, what do you do with them? Well, this design actually accommodates two 2.5 inch by 3 inch cards. And as well, for the outside, I used an upsized one of them to be a little bit bigger so that I could put that on the front of my card. So it's a gatefold card. Do take a look at the video that I did on how to prototype using Silhouette Studio. It's really a good way to visualize what your finished product is going to look like, especially when you're using digital paper packs. There's so many different options in a lot of them, it's hard to tell what would go well together because until you print it out, you don't have an actual paper copy of it. So this way you can see on screen exactly what it's going to look like. This is also one of the cards that you get. It's 4 inches by 3 inches, and oftentimes you'll get these as journaling cards in a paper pack as well. And so this design will allow you to use one of those to put your greeting on. Because this is 5x7, I needed to have 2 sheets of base paper because you don't have 15 inch wide paper. And so this will fold together, but total width when you smush it out is 15 inches wide. You also will need 8 little pieces in a coordinating paper that are 1.5 inches by 1.25 inches. This was one piece that was 4 7/8 by 6 7/8, and I cut it in half. I wanted to have a 1/16 inch reveal all around. However, I wanted it to match up in the middle. Because this is a random pattern, but there are words in it, I also need to make sure that when I glue it down, that the words aren't upside down. You will also need, in another coordinating paper, similar or different, 6 pieces that are 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches. As well as 2.5 inch by 3 pieces for the sides, and various notes if you want a piece that goes along the front or not. You could decorate the front however you want because the front will be a full 5x7 front on the card. Off camera, I cut everything down, and I cut my paper to be 7 inches by 10 inches. This will actually overlap in the middle at 5 inches. So let's get started on our cutting and scoring. Before I got started on doing the video, I actually created this note paper template to figure out exactly where all my score lines need to be and my cuts need to be. And I'll have a copy of this on my blog post, so take a look there for exactly where the measurements are. And you can see that this piece is actually cut because when it glues on to this section, you need to have it cut in order to accommodate the fold like on this side. So let's get started. Using this as my template, I'm going to take one of the pieces of base cardstock. This is a purple from Basil, and the color is not listed. Pansy, like the flower, or a wimp. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to score. I'm going to remove the cutting blade so I don't accidentally cut instead of score. I'm going to score the card at 1.5 inches from the long edge, and I'm going to start on the first card at 1.25 inch, and that's a 5-inch long score. So from 1.25 down to 6.25. Also, it needs to be scored at 8.75 to the very end, and that will accommodate this. You're going to actually cut that later on. So that's 1.25 inches at this edge. Flip the page around, and we'll do just the opposite. We're going to start here and come down to 1.25 inch. And then we will start at 3.75 inches and go to 8.75 inches. That gives 1.25 here where it's not scored. Again, that's a 5-inch score line. Now for the tricky part. Where exactly do you score going this way? Well, we know that this is 1.25 inches long, so we're going to go from the edge up to 1.5, and from 1.5 up to the edge. We're not going to score in between the lines. Starting on this end, we're going to do the same thing. Now, because this has markings on this cutting tool that go on this side of the blade and the score, I can actually just use this rather than trying to use the lines here. So, from the edge up to 1.5, and from 1.5 to the edge. The next score needs to be here at 2.5 inches, and that goes all the way through. So that's 2.5 inches all the way through. The next one is at 5 inches. That also goes all the way through. The next one is at 6.25. That only goes from the top and the bottom to where the score lines are. It's 1.5 inches up from the top, 1.5 inches up from the bottom. And I don't know if you can see the score lines, but I have short, long, long, short, short. 1.25, 2.5, 5, 6.25, 8.75. Now, this other piece, so that's the first side. This other piece has quite a few fewer folds. So on this one, again, we're going to have score on each side, but on this one, this is at 1.5 inches. We're going to start at 3 3/4 inches and go to 8 3/4 inches. Same thing on this side. Three 3/4 to 8 3/4. Okay. Now, for these score lines. So here we have 3 3/4. We're going to go from 1.5 inches up, 5.5 down, 1.5 inches up. We're going to go at 5 inches, and that will go all the way top to bottom. We're going to go to 7.5 inches. That one again is full length, top to bottom. And then we're going to go at 8 3/4, which is also 1 1/4 on this side. And that's only going to go 1.5 inches up, 1.5 inches down. Okay, so there's our two pieces folded. Next comes where we're going to be cutting. So I had mentioned this piece needs to be cut at 1 1/4 inches on the right hand side. And for that, I'm actually just going to use my scissors. Those will fold for where the card comes folding back into itself. I'm going to replace the blade now on my trimmer. I'm going to use the trimmer to make the cut from 1 1/4 to 6 1/4 at 1.5 inches. Going to do it on the same on this side, 1.5 inches. From 1 1/4 down just to 6 1/4. Alrighty, sorry about that, had to change camera gear. So we have our cuts from 1 1/4 to 6 1/4 at 1.5 inches, plus 1 1/4 inch cut here on this end. Now for the next page, we want to also trim along these score lines. So for this one, we're going to be at 1.5 inches, starting at 3 3/4 inches down to 8 3/4 inches. Again, 1.5 inches in, starting at 3 3/4 inches. Plunge the blade in, come down to 8 3/4 inches. And that's it for this one. We only have those 2 cuts on this one. Now you might be wondering why. Well, for this one, this back part is actually going to be glued to the back of this piece. And that now gives us the full 15 inches across. These pieces here will actually get glued down. These pieces on this side don't. So I have my Beacon 3-in-1 glue, and I can tell you, I had it laying down in my craft cart, and I got this big giant glue booger. So apparently this lid is not very well sealed, otherwise you get big giant glue boogers. So before we get started, we're actually going to glue this together. And I'm going to glue on the back side, because then I can see where all my score marks are. Now this stuff is highly flammable. It's alcohol based and it dries quickly, which is great. However, it is also highly flammable. Before we get started, actually, I'm going to fold this fold. So we got mountain, valley, mountain, valley. So I'm going to fold this. That'll make it a little bit easier to fold later on. So I'm going to glue this, starting here, around, and then all the way to the edge. Make sure this gets nice and glued. I'm going to lay this cardstock behind, cardstock number 2 behind, and glue it down to the back. I want to make sure that it's even on each side. Let that dry for a minute. Oop, nope, that doesn't get glued, this doesn't get glued. That's why those edges are up. Okay, so to start to fold, we have a mountain fold, mountain, valley, mountain. So you got mountains in between the 2 valleys. Then We have valley and mountain. Mountain, valley, mountain. Valley. If all goes well, you'll have something that looks like this and all the edges line up. That is when I burnish it, is when I make sure all my corners are even. Don't want to do that before, because sometimes when you have score marks, it doesn't sit nicely when you fold it. So only after I see that it's nicely put together and all lined up will I burnish it. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on this side. Mountain, mountain, valley, valley. Valley, mountain, valley. Mountain, valley, mountain, valley. Mountain Valley. Now when I glue the two pieces together, there's a tiny bit of overlap here. And I know I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to try to trim it away. My decorative paper won't cover that. At least not enough. Okay, now for the fun part. Now we decorate. I'm going to start on the outside, and you'll notice that these are actually fairly large pieces, even though I have a notch here. I actually cut these so that they would completely cover and meet in the middle. So I'm going to put those on first. Because you have this cutout, I'm not going to glue this piece. I'm actually going to glue onto the card base. You could use tape for this, however, given the fact that I want to make sure that the paper doesn't move around, I'm going to use glue. And that way it gives me a little bit of wiggle room, and it also builds a little bit of support and strength into the structure of the card. Now remember, I mentioned earlier, this has little very light words in it, so I want to make sure that they're facing upright as I glue them down. I also want to make sure I don't get glue too close to the edge, since there is a 1/16 inch reveal around each side. Now, had I planned it a little bit better, I actually would have made these decorative pieces a little wider to span the gap in the middle. However, I didn't. So I'm going to put this and save this piece for last. So now, to do the designs on the inside. I do have pieces that go here. Even though you don't really see them unless you open the card, I did make pieces to cover that up. Again, I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of a reveal along each edge. Now these two panels are where we have our little drawing card panels. However, this is 4 inches and these are only 3. So I'm just going to line it up centered in the middle of that area. And there'll be a little bit more blue or purple showing behind that. This is where our greeting goes in the middle. And that also has about a 1/16 inch of a reveal around each side. Now there are 6 of these. These were a little bit less, by 2 3/8 by 1 3/8. Now I could have used a different pattern paper, and I thought about putting little flowers on, but I also didn't want to put anything that might get in the way of the mechanics of the card. So I just used these plain panels right here with no embellishments. The only problem with this being a 5 inch by 7 inch card is that invariably you always have to get a second stamp for it. One stamp is not enough. They're usually more than an ounce in weight. And especially since we're going to have double card base on part of this. Now you may notice my glue starts to booger up in between. And if you work fast enough, you can get it so that the amount of glue coming out is the amount that you need for each piece. Spread these out. Do the middle, because I got a big glob of glue. Now my preference would be to use some flowers or something on the outside of this, maybe a couple cutouts to spruce it up a little bit. However, because I want to be sending this through the mail, I don't want it to have anything that will make it even thicker than it already is. Otherwise it becomes a challenge to mail. I do seem to be missing one of these. I had 8 of them. I don't know what happened to the other one. Now you do want to also try to get these aligned. Well, you get the idea. And I want to make sure that for this one I only put glue on one half of it. So I want to set it and kind of get it into position so I can see where the glue needs to be, and I only want to glue one side of it. Before I put that down, I want to make sure upright, upright, and glue. Nothing worse than having it upside down. Don't ask me how I know that. And, except for that one tiny little piece that seems to be missing, there you have it. That was almost all in real time. So I didn't use any fast forward on this video or time compression. So that's how quick it was to make this card. Now, take a look at my other video where I talk about prototyping, and you can see how I chose the patterns for the paper that I wanted to use in this card. Also, take a look at our blog to see other posts about other cards that I've made, as well as mixed media and art journaling. Pretty cool, huh? Thank you. Enjoy. Happy crafting.